Kalau kalian ngikutin ranah perkembangan industri video game di Indonesia, pastinya udah nggak asing lagi dengan Coffe. Game ini adalah visual novel yang dikembangkan oleh Togo Production dan pertama kali dirilis pada tahun 2020. Dan sesuai judulnya, game ini tentang obrolan-obrolan pas lagi ngopi. Tapi yang bikin game ini unik adalah pengunjung coffee shop tempat kalian ngopi itu adalah makhluk-makhluk gaib kayak orc, elf, dan lain-lainnya. Ya walaupun gak semuanya makhluk gaib ya, karena ada juga manusia. But you get the point. Menariknya, setelah rilisan dua game pertamanya, yang keduanya berlatar di kota Seattle, game ketiganya menyeberang samudra hingga ke Tokyo dengan karakter baru, makhluk mitologi baru, beberapa fitur baru, dan juga tim developer baru. Nah, makanya untuk menggali lebih dalam mengenai game ini, ReArchivu mutusin buat nanya langsung ke Togi Productions. Dan beberapa waktu lalu, akhirnya kita berkesempatan juga buat ngobrol dengan salah satu developernya dari studio Commerce Worldwide ya, yaitu Winterstein sebagai lead writer-nya. Menariknya, Anna menggambarkan Coffee Talk Tokyo sebagai sebuah spin-off ya, bukan game mainline dari franchise-nya. Jadi, apa alasan di balik keputusan itu? Sebagai bagian dari segmen baru kami, yaitu ArchivExpose, di mana kami berbincang dengan tokoh industri untuk mengekspos cerita mereka secara komprehensif agar menjadi sebuah archive. Nah, biar enak sekalian ya, karena kita bakal ngobrolin Coffee Talk, siapin minuman kalian, dan daripada lama-lama, mari kita langsung masuk aja ke pembahasannya. Obrolan dengan Nana itu kurang lebih berlangsung sekitar 30 menit. Cukup padat ya, dan sangat produktif, di mana kita berhasil membahas berbagai aspek, mulai dari segi naratifnya, gameplay, dan bahkan sampai ada beberapa spoiler kebocoran. Tapi gue rasa di antara berbagai pertanyaan-pertanyaan itu ada satu hal yang menjadi pertanyaan utamanya, yaitu kenapa memilih Tokyo? Ada apa sebenarnya di Tokyo? Dan tema apa yang coba diulik lewat representasi kota ini di dalam Coffee Talk? Dalam obrolan itu, yang menurut gue paling menarik adalah bagaimana Anna mendeskripsikan bahwa Tokyo sebagai sebuah kota yang unik, di mana pada kota ini berbagai hal seperti masyarakat yang sibuk bekerja, suasananya yang sangat padat, tapi terisolasi secara sosial, penuh gedung-gedung tinggi dan lampu neon. Itu semua kemudian menyatu menjadi latar yang dianggap oleh Commerce Worldwide dan Togi Production sebagai ideal untuk game baru dari Coffee Talk. Tak hanya itu, yang gue baru tahu adalah ternyata Coffee Talk pertama sendiri sebenarnya juga terinspirasi dari sebuah drama Netflix yang berlatar di Tokyo.
Yeah, there are a few, to be honest. So we were looking at the point where we started looking at the idea of a different setting was because we wanted to look into making a spin-off, right? This isn't to say that there aren't stories to be told in the original Coffee Talk universe. Start telling also some new stories in the same world. And so the question was where, right? And the thing about Tokyo is, first of all, I don't know if you know that, but the original Coffee Talk game has been inspired by many different things. But one of the sources of inspiration was this TV show called Midnight Diner, which is actually like it's I don't know. Have you ever watched it?
I don't.
Honestly, I highly recommend it. It's super heartwarming. It's like this bunch of like misfits that come into a Tokyo izakaya late at night, and they talk about their stories while the master sort of listens and occasionally gives them advice. So it definitely has like this Coffee Talk vibes. So in that sense, there was something like, going to Tokyo feels a little bit like a wink to that particular inspiration. But then also beyond that, Tokyo is a very unique city. Like for me, the first time I went to Tokyo was, I want to say, I'm old, almost 20 years ago now. And on the one hand, sort of you walk in there and it's very modern in some ways. It has this very tall skyscrapers, neon lights, very busy. People are working people, right? So they're often dressed in suits. So at face value, like, well, it's just a big city, but it's not really. It's completely its own thing. Like the atmosphere, the color of the light, the way that people interact, the way that the architecture is still very, like, it has this streets sometimes that are very sort of old style that are tucked away behind like this building, these extremely tall buildings that have been built like 20 years ago. It has an extremely unique atmosphere. And so we thought moving it in that new atmosphere and make something that still sort of feels like Coffee Talk, but also feels different enough that it can justify being a spin-off. And finally, the culture in Japan, like the history, the mythology is very rich, right? There are many mythical creatures that are completely different from Western creatures. They have so many stories about yokai, so many myths and legends that are such an interesting like ground, such a fertile ground to bring new characters and to create new stories. And we wanted that as well. And we knew that because Chorus Worldwide has a lot of ties with Japan, we knew that we would be able to do these stories justice, more importantly, right? As opposed to in many other corners of the world that also have equally sort of interesting and wealthy cultural backgrounds. We just didn't necessarily have the resources to, I would say, engage with them in the same with the same depth. And we don't want, obviously this is Coffee Talk, we really don't want to dig into these stories if we cannot talk about them properly. So it's all those reasons.
Jadi memang menarik banget ya tentang Tokyo sebagai latarnya. Tapi nggak berhenti di situ aja. Buat kalian yang familiar dengan pop culture Jepang ya, gue rasa udah pasti pada tau lah bahwa Tokyo itu adalah kota yang sangat padat, penuh dengan aktivitas manusia, tetapi seringkali terlihat terpisah secara emosional. Maksudnya adalah kayak, ya ini emang kota yang sangat sibuk, tapi kehidupan sibuk itu membuat orang-orang cenderung jadi tidak punya waktu untuk berinteraksi dengan satu sama lain. Membuat kota ini menjadi sangat antisosial berkebalikan dengan jumlah manusia yang tinggal di dalamnya. Jadi pertanyaannya kan adalah apakah mereka akan mengeksplorasi tema ini melalui Tokyo? Dan jika iya, bagaimana caranya mereka mengeksplorasinya? Topik ini juga jadi semakin menarik dengan bagaimana Ana sendiri menjelaskan bagaimana Coffee Talk itu adalah sebuah game tentang koneksi manusia. Selain itu, Ana juga secara spesifik menyebut bahwa desain dari cafe Coffee Talk ini yang berada di Tokyo ini terinspirasi sebagian besarnya dari salah satu budaya cafe di Tokyo, khususnya jazz kisah. Tapi gua rasa mendingan kalian langsung denger aja dari Ana.
A little bit. I think, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes in general. So that is the thing about Coffee Talk in general, right? Is the reason why it takes place in big cities from the start is because they are games about connection. And in this game, we have quite a few characters who don't know each other starting out or don't know each other very well. And then by meeting in the cafe, they get to know each other and they manage to, I think, move past internal conflicts that they have struggled to move past before. And definitely it applies to some characters more than others. Some characters come from having a bigger support network than others, which is as it is in real life, right? But some characters, I think, I'm thinking of one in particular, I'm not going to say who, but there is one character in particular who I think struggles with loneliness. And I don't know if we ever say it in exactly that way, but as the game progresses, you can definitely see that gets fixed and that they get a friendship group, and that is really like helpful. But there are several characters who ultimately land on this like who come to realize the importance of community, I would say. So in that way, the theme definitely exists, yes. I mean, the cafe is inspired by, I think, everyone's experience of Tokyo cafes. And one thing that is kind of really unique in the Tokyo cafe culture is the jazz cafes, the jazz kisa. So that was part of the inspiration, definitely, in the sense that, like there are these they feel like little places outside of time, basically. Like you walk in there you can be in a very bustling street with lots of shops anywhere. Like lots of them tend to be in Shibukitazawa, some of them are in Shibuya. So in Shibuya, like you walk around and it's like neon lights everywhere. People like cover the entire road. You can barely like sort of weave your way through. And then you walk into this place and you come in and it's complete silence. Everyone's just sitting at the table and there is jazz music playing on a fantastic sound system. And obviously this isn't exactly like that because this is a place of conversation, unlike a jazz kissa. But I think we really like this idea that when you walk into this place, you kind of sort of leave the world outside behind a little bit, and you manage to, as a result, you manage to put yourself maybe in a slightly different circumstance, in a circumstance where suddenly it becomes maybe easier to talk about your problems, easier to think about your problems, easier to just take a breath and be like, what should be my next step really? And we wanted to give that impression, and that's why we took that inspiration, I think.
Terlepas dari Tokyo sendiri sebagai latar dari naratif utamanya, hal baru dari game ini juga hadir lewat gameplaynya pastinya. Karena ini adalah Coffee Talk, game tentang obrolan ketika lagi ngopi di kedai kopi, maka tentunya ada beberapa pilihan minuman juga ya kan yang akan dihadirkan. Nah, kalau di game sebelumnya itu pilihan minumannya cuma ada minuman-minuman hangat, tetapi khususnya untuk Coffee Talk Tokyo, kami menemukan adanya minuman dingin ketika memainkan demonya. Selain minumannya sendiri, ada fitur lain yang juga cukup menarik, yaitu Tomodachill 2.0. Ini sebenarnya fitur yang udah ada pada versi asli. Tomodachill ini basically kayak semacam sosial media di mana sang pemilik kafe dan para pengunjungnya bisa terhubung gitu. Nah, di Coffee Talk Tokyo, fitur ini juga kembali dihadirkan, tapi dengan beberapa improvisasi dan disebut Tomodachill 2.0. Makanya melihat berbagai fitur-fitur baru ini, kita juga pengen tahu apa alasan fitur-fitur ini dihadirkan dan bagaimana fitur-fitur ini terhubung ke dalam naratif dan membantu kenikmatan pemain gitu.
Okay, so stencils, stencils and cold drinks came from slightly different logics, right? So the stencils is because we really enjoy the latte art in this game, but I guess we wanted to give players just a bit more to play with that, because I think ultimately, if you want to engage a bit more with the drink making process, that's where you get like a lot of agency, right? Because you can sort of go in and tweak it and stuff. And we thought having an extra tool there might just be fun. Like for this, because there are, like in the original Coffee Talks, there were quite a few players that got into like the latte art and made really cool stuff with it. And we kind of wanted to see what happens if we give them something extra, because now having this like stencil, you can then go back onto the stencil with the latte art tool and shift it around as well, and like change the drawing into something else. Like I'm sure, honestly, like players are always way more creative than we could possibly imagine. So I cannot wait to see what they make of that. And then for the cold drinks, I think we were just thinking like, how do we approach the fact that this is ultimately a coffee shop in Tokyo? And yes, like it's a coffee shop is a coffee shop is a coffee shop. Ultimately, it makes coffee. But what's going to be different by moving it to Japan? And the thing is, Japan in the summer is so hot. Like the first time I went there was in July, and I love Tokyo. Tokyo is one of my favorite cities in the whole wide world. But stepping out of the plane, I felt like someone had put a wet towel on my face. And that's how it is. Like you walk into this like very hot, humid climate, and you need to refresh yourselves quite a lot at times. Obviously, the game takes place in the summer, and you know, like this is such a massive part of you walk on Tokyo in summer. They will be saying like coffee floats, and they will be saying this like amazing, beautiful, like super colorful and decorated ice-based drinks. And also, like I told you, I'm not a massive coffee drinker because I cannot drink coffee, but I still like the taste. And decaf can be a bit of a hard sell, but when I was in Tokyo, I had incredible iced decafs. Like they were so good, they were amazing. And we just felt like we wanted to do justice to all that and to have drinks in the game that reflected all that, and also make the players maybe feel that it was hot out a little bit. And I think when you have characters come in and say, oh my God, I've been sweating buckets, I need a nice drink now, I think it helps convey that as well. One thing that we considered going into Coffee Talk Tokyo was sort of, is there any mechanic that we can tweak a little bit, used to also contribute to telling the story in a way that's a little bit new? And we felt like Tomodachill was a pretty good candidate because it already exists in the game. It's something that original players will be used to, and that makes sense, right, with all the rest of the game. It's already a tool to get to know the characters better. And we thought it would be fun to make it just a little bit more interactive. So the main thing that we did is that we added this hashtag feature. So in the original Tomodachill, you only ever see posts from the characters that you interact with, right? So you will see posts from the characters from the game. But in this instance, we wanted to open up the world a little bit. And so by following hashtags, you will be able to see posts on those hashtags from characters that you don't follow.
Oh.
And so that may be like one of the goals is to give the world a bit more texture simply, right? There will be quite a few posts that don't really provide maybe like story relevant information, but that tell you a little bit about Tokyo, about Japan, about the vibes of the place, which we felt was quite nice to open up the world just a little bit past the cafe and give a little glimpse into what it's like outside, right? But then by following these very same hashtags, you may also find content that will then feed back into the story. And by seeing that content, you might unlock little like story content and stuff like that gives you a little bit more from the game. And finally, you might also find some Easter eggs there, tying into your previous question.
Kalau buat gua sendiri ya, secara pribadi, Coffee Talk itu cukup ikonik khususnya dengan makhluk-makhluk mitologi yang dihadirkannya. Maksud gua gini, di kedua Coffee Talk pertama, kita melihat makhluk-makhluk mitologi ikonik seperti Putri Duyung, Orc, Elf, dan lain-lain. Dan mereka di situ pun bukan tanpa alasan, tapi juga punya alasannya. Ana menjelaskan ini sebagai berikut. Salah satu kekuatan terbesar dari Coffee Talk asli adalah alasan mengapa makhluk ini ada, karena mereka menjadi simbol akan suatu hal. Dengan game ini yang milih latar baru dan milih Tokyo sebagai latar utamanya kali ini, tentu akan ada berbagai spekulasi. Makhluk-makhluk apa yang kira-kira bakal muncul? Apalagi Jepang sendiri, budaya dan legenda masyarakatnya itu cukup kental. Misal dari yang kita udah lihat aja ya, ada kayak kapal gitu, hantu-hantu khas Jepang dan mungkin beberapa makhluk lain ya. Gilanya, ternyata di tahap awal pengembangan game ini hampir ada 70-80 makhluk mitologi yang sempat mereka pilih. Walau ya di hasil akhirnya nggak bakal sebanyak itu.
And interesting to know that you mention creatures, right? Especially found in Western cultures such as orcs, werewolf, elves, especially in previous games. With Tokyo as the settings, did you face any challenge in deciding which creatures would work as a character? I mean, there's a ghost. I mean, I played demo. There's a ghost. There's a kappa. Do you have any challenge from that?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, it was very challenging because we had so much to choose from, right? Like, sort of, it was so exciting to come into like the Japanese folklore and working with. So obviously, very obviously, I'm not Japanese, right? But one of the other writers who started on the project from the very beginning is actually Kimitaka Ogawa, who is also the Japanese translator of the original Coffee Talk games, right? So he knows the games very well, but he's also from Japan and he knows the Japanese culture very well. And then a concept artist, Crowsad, she's also Japanese. And so we had these two creative people working on bringing up all these characters from the get-go, and we had a decently long list to choose from, sort of digging through. I also dug through like books about Japanese folklore and stuff, and honestly I think we could have had a cast of 80 characters, but obviously it's not possible, so we had to narrow it down, but ultimately the process of narrowing them down I think was relatively organic because well, as usual, like one of the big strengths of the original Coffee Talk is that the reason why these fantasy races even exist, right, is because they end up being symbolic of a few things. And at the same time, they also allow the game to then slightly subvert expectations and to play into what the stereotype of that fantasy sort of race, maybe versus the person that the character actually is. And we wanted to continue doing the same thing. And so as Crow drew some characters and we had like a bunch of meetings early on where we talked through all the possible characters and why we wanted them. I think some characters just emerged and we felt like there was a strong cohesiveness of the inspiration, like the background for who the character might be, and then the character traits and the character's personal story. And that's how we landed on the characters that we have now, which I must say, not all of them are fantasy creatures, much like in the original Coffee Talk was have a couple of humans, which makes also for an interesting mix and match. But yeah, the first challenge was really to convince ourselves that 11 characters is enough.
And do you think there's any creatures that maybe finally going to be 160 or probably 80% going to be choosing, and then it doesn't get choose? Do you have any creators there?
Well, I think there is one that small spoiler, I guess, for the characters in the game, but one that did not make it in, which is quite famous, and so was like one of the first ideas, is the Oni character. But I think the reason why it didn't make it through ultimately is because we felt that there were already characters in the original Coffee Talk that were a bit closer to what an Oni might be. For example, Lua being a succubus is kind of like it's not exactly the same thing as an Oni, obviously, but it has a bit more proximity, and we wanted the characters to feel fairly different. But that was one of the surprise ones where we're starting and it was like, yeah, Oni seems like an obvious one, and then it didn't happen.
Di antara semua karakter-karakter itu, ada satu karakter yang ternyata cukup menonjol waktu kita mainin gamenya, yaitu karakter Vin yang jadi asisten barista. Padahal di game sebelumnya kita nggak ada asisten barista. Ya walau memang ada Freya ya yang secara teknis berperan mirip seperti itu. Ana juga menjelaskan bahwa karakter Vin memang sengaja dibuat mencolok dan hadir di situ menjadi semacam benang merah antar para karakter yang tidak saling kenal ini sebenarnya awalnya.
First of all, there's a bit of a difference between the original Coffee Talk and Coffee Talk Episode 2, right? In Coffee Talk Episode 2, it's fair to say that there is no assistant or anything like that. In Coffee Talk 1, while it's not an assistant, there is a character who is present in the cafe very often, and who sort of makes a through line through the game, and that's obviously Freya. And I mean, Freya has her own character. She's very sassy. She's very like I love her to bits. Honestly, I played the first Coffee Talk as a fan. I absolutely I had no ties to the game at that point, and I loved it so much. And Freya is like, everyone loves Freya. And I think besides the fact that she's this fantastic, very unique character who people just like on her own terms, it also felt really nice to have someone that you sort of had a more consistent bond throughout the game. Because by virtue of this being a coffee shop, characters do tend to come and go a little bit. And just have someone who comes in a bit more often felt very nice for me as a player. And I think we had this desire to replicate that a little bit. That's how we came up with Vin. And Vin, they are a very different character from Freya, just in personality. They are a bit like softer and shyer. And obviously they are, they have this current role of assistant barista. You'll see how it works exactly. It's a story thing essentially. It doesn't change the way that players will interact with the drinks or anything like that. But yes, I think ultimately they still provide this sort of through line of coming back a bit more often and having these conversations that recur a bit more, and we hope it helps ease players into this new familiarity basically.
Dan itulah obrolan kami dengan Ana. Cukup menarik melihat Coffee Talk Tokyo ini. Kami sendiri tentunya sebagai player juga menaruh ekspektasi kepada game ini ya. I mean, gue rasa wajar aja karena pastinya Game baru bakal lebih baik dari game sebelumnya, itu ekspektasi yang wajar. Tapi terlepas dari ekspektasi pribadi itu, gua rasa sebaiknya kita tunggu aja nantinya ketika rilisan pada 21 Mei 2026. Dan tanggal ini udah dikonfirm oleh Ana juga nggak bakal delay dan bakal rilis untuk multiplatform via PC, PS5, Xbox Series, dan Nintendo Switch juga. Nah, interview ini yang gue masukkan dalam video sebenarnya juga hanya sebagian aja, udah diedit biar lebih teratur dan biar videonya juga nggak terlalu panjang ya. Tapi kalau kalian mau tahu bahasan lengkapnya, sebenarnya kalian bisa baca lewat website kami di ReArchivu Media yang juga belum sempat diangkat di video ini. Linknya nanti bisa kalian cek di deskripsi dan kolom komentar bakal gue kasih. Nah, sebagai penutup juga, Ana punya sebuah pesan untuk para fans dan juga pemain-pemain baru yang tertarik. Tapi sebelum itu, gue rasa seperti biasa, kalau kalian suka konten ini, jangan lupa buat like dan subscribe ke channel kami biar gak ketinggalan video menarik lainnya. Lalu, kalau kalian punya pendapat, kalian bisa komen dan juga jangan lupa kalau kalian nonton di HP buat kirim hype karena itu bakal sangat membantu buat kami. Kalau kalian mau dukung kami lebih, kalian juga bisa berdonasi melalui traktir mulai dari Rp1.000 aja. So, ya, itu aja dari gua. Dan gue Wilson sekalian, ReArchivu signing out.
Well, I want to say first of all, thank you so much for supporting the original Coffe games and for gifting them to the rest of the world, honestly, because this came from you guys. Like it came from your country, and it's such a fantastic game. Like when I played it first, it was life-changing for me. Genuinely, I think the way that it impacted me was major, and I really hope that with this game, which is made elsewhere by a new team and takes place in a new area and stuff, but I still hope that we can give you the same warmth and the same joy that we've been taking from the first games. And thank you for your support, for your continued support. It really means a lot.